นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ And blessings. In a few days' time, I'll be traveling to the monastery of our teacher, Chah, for the annual anniversary of his death, which this year is a very small event because of COVID, of course, but still it's an important day in our calendar because it's the day we remember the passing of our teacher, and we go to the Chettiya or stupa in Wat Nongbapong, his monastery, and bow, first of all circumambulate, go around 3 times, bow and pay respects and chant verses in homage of Ajahn Chah, remembering him. Fairly simple ceremony of remembrance, but I think for many, many people very powerful recollection of the teacher and supportive of the practice. The day after that I'll be in Bangkok, and we hope to cast a Buddha statue for Bodhipala Monastery in Adelaide, South Australia. In the traditional way, which is hard to find nowadays, but in Thailand is still done in a number of places where a model of the Buddha statue figure that you wished for is made in wax, life-size, according to the skill of the artist and the sponsors and those involved. They'll make a wax impression in beeswax or other forms of wax. And once everyone is satisfied, they'll cover that with plaster, like plaster of Paris, make a hard mould from the soft wax. And they call this method the lost wax method. So then the wax, the whole mould will be heated and the wax drained off, and it leaves a space which can then be filled with bronze, molten bronze, or in a very fairly fast ceremony, they'll be pouring the molten bronze into that mould, and then it sets almost instantly. As soon as it cools, it becomes hard in the shape of the Buddha. But while that's going on, the Sangha, who've been invited or assembled, and this year we've invited Lumpur Anand to preside over the ceremony, and Lumpur Nyanadamo as well to join. The Sangha will chant, spread metta, chant paritas for the blessing and for the auspicious occasion, just to bless and bring in good energy on that occasion for that particular statue. Then there'll be some, once it's formed, there'll be some work done on it to just remove any impurities or what they call burrs, these bits of extra bronze, which are highly sought after, because when they are sanded or ground off the statue, people collect them for good luck, because they've been blessed. And then once the Buddha is looking good and finished properly with its final finish, then it's hopefully will be transported to Adelaide by ship and to the monastery. That whole process will take a few months. So it's nice to be able to focus on something auspicious in the time of COVID, where there's always so much bad news. Everyone is coughing, but it's not from COVID. I think it's the time of year, or the dusty atmosphere. I'm not sure. But anyway, some good news to focus on, something auspicious. To recollect the Buddha is always a way that brightens the mind. Certainly for me, brings up happiness just recollecting the Buddha, whether it's thinking of a Buddha image, the image of the Buddha, or the qualities of the Buddha, or the life story of the Buddha. Whatever aspect you look at the Buddha tends to brighten the mind and bring happiness. It's a meditation in itself. And then similarly to recollect and remember our teacher, Ajahn Chah. The physical Ajahn Chah, the historical Ajahn Chah, and then of course the Dhamma that he taught and realized and passed on to us in his teachings. Or the relics, the bone relics, which we go to pay respects to. There's different aspects to recollecting the Buddha or the Dhamma or the Sangha. And we have different means. So the Buddha allowed for a stupa to be built to house the relics of a Buddha or an Arahant. It's one of the few Buddhist buildings that are considered appropriate, a place of worship, place of respect. In the time of the Buddha, there were no statues. The Buddha was still alive, and there was no statues of the Buddha. He said after he's gone, you can use a Bodhi tree as a place of worship. He didn't encourage statues at first. These came later with the influence of the Greeks who came to India. But I think nowadays people universally find statues helpful in their practice, to make them, place them in halls, even on shrines in their homes. And you'll find them all over the world now. Maybe too many sometimes, because you can even find them in Bunnings sitting on the floor as a garden ornament. Nevertheless, a statue or a stupa is a way to recollect the Buddha or the teacher. And that's their purpose. And recollect means to bring up mindfulness, Buddhanusati, mindfulness of the Buddha or the qualities of the Buddha. Sanghanusati, mindfulness or recollection of the qualities of Sangha. Ajahn Chah would always elaborate on this, and quite often he would say, well, what we are doing is recollecting those qualities to brighten the mind and to wake up to the truth, to awaken our minds in the process. As any wholesome, skillful object you turn your mind to, focus on, pay attention to, bring up mindfulness, has the effect of awakening the mind. Because our habit is to go into daydreaming, endless streams of thought proliferation, sleepiness as well, but often just thinking from one idea, one problem, one issue to the next, without much guidance or wakefulness. But this is to wake us up out of that habit. establish mindfulness, bring back present and moment awareness. So the presence of a Buddha statue can do that. You stop. When you see a Buddha statue, you stop, you look at it, you become more awake at that moment. Might help you cut through your whatever you were thinking of. Just pause. And if you are someone of faith, you may lift your hands up in Anjali or bow down at the statue as a sign of respect, but also as a way of bringing up mindfulness. And similarly with the relics of Ajahn Chah, they wake you up in the sense you go there, you pause other things in your life, you become mindful of the teacher, remember his teachings, the example he gave. So it's putting a pause on the stream of all your other mental activity. So it's an actual meditation. And the way it's done at the monastery, when on this anniversary of his death, it's done as a meditation, walking meditation around the shrine, and then mindfully bowing and reciting a verse of homage and asking forgiveness. It brings up mindfulness. And the recollection of Buddha Dhamma Sangha is essential to Buddhist practice. It's part of the Eightfold Noble Path. If you want to give it a name, you'd call it part of Samma Sati and Samma Samadhi. But you also call it part of Samma Ditti. Just placing the Buddha Dhamma Sangha central to your thinking and to your life has a very powerful, wholesome effect on the mind. But of course we forget, which is why Ajahn Chah said it wakes us up when you come back to establish mindfulness on the Buddha, Dhamma Sangha. It's waking you up, so you're not forgetting. Another way of describing a state of mindfulness is the state of non-forgetting. Whatever you're recollecting. So non-forgetting the Buddha, non-forgetting the Dhamma, non-forgetting the Sangha. Another thing I remember from Ajahn Chah's teaching is that he'd talk about our practice is like making a Buddha statue, in the sense that to make a Buddha statue, whether it's of stone, or it's carved out of timber, or it's made of bronze or other alloys, the raw materials that begin the process are totally unlike a Buddha. You have a block of wood or a log of wood, you have a piece of stone, you have wax, a lump of wax waiting to be made into a mould, shaped and carved by an artist. But it all begins as just the raw materials, unshaped, uncarved. Like our mind, when we begin the practice. The raw materials we come into the practice with are our own accumulated karma, which expresses itself sometimes in wholesome ways, sometimes in unwholesome ways. Our mind expresses greed, anger, delusion, fear, anxiety, and so on. This is the raw material that we bring to the practice. So clearly our mind is not yet the mind of an arahant or a Buddha. And that's obvious, but we also have to be aware that the practice and the training of the mind with the Eightfold Noble Path is a process of gradual development, waking up, and conditioning or shaping the mind by developing the factors of the path, just in the same way as the artist will shape that wax slowly, meticulously, and hopefully artistically into the form of a Buddha. In the same way, slowly, will shape our minds into the mind of a mind that is beyond suffering, the goal of our practice. A mind that is peaceful, pure, bright, happy, and all the other attributes of the well-trained mind. That's the final product we're aiming for, but slowly, gradually we have to work towards it through the training. And in the same way we make a Buddha statue, we can't make it all in one go, we have to keep working at it. And if you ever watch the artist at work working with wax, and carving would be similar, they do a bit and they step back and they do a bit more and they shape it and they add a bit here and they remove a bit there, and at the end of the day they've got something looking like a statue that they're interested in but maybe not quite right, so they sleep on it, come back with a fresh eye the next day and do a bit more until eventually the process is complete and you have the Buddha, ideally the Buddha of your dreams, but a Buddha image that is satisfying and may evoke certain religious emotion or feelings, particularly feeling of peace, serenity. Some people find Buddha statues reassuring, grounding, gives them a sense of security, safety with the peace that arises, and so on. Buddhists find them very helpful in the practice to return to the Buddha image. But in the same way, one is developing gradually those qualities through the practice until they also bring up the same religious emotions and states of mind, states of peace, and maybe unshakable peace, in the same way as a statue is difficult to topple over. So the unshakable peace of a peaceful, well-trained mind, the mindfulness, and then the wisdom and the beautiful qualities of the mind that come as we practice. So the compassion, the kindness, the virtues that come out, the patience, and so on. All of this combines to make a state of mind or an experience of mind that is both beautiful, long-lasting, peaceful, happy, desirable, you might say. Desirable in a wholesome way, without greed or attachment, but just because it is a mind that is true and good. So Ajahn Chah would use this picture sometimes of shaping the wax into the Buddha. It's just like shaping the mind with practice into the mind that is seeing and knowing truth and knowing the Dhamma. And it's inevitably going to be a process. It takes time, takes effort, and sometimes we get it wrong. Just like when you make a statue, sometimes you put a bit too much there and it looks wrong. You haven't seen it yourself, but maybe someone else comes up and sees it, tells you, gives you some feedback. Sometimes your hand moves too swiftly or too firmly and you knock the nose off, or you push in a bit or something, and you have to go back and repair the damage. But because it's wax, you can. And our practice is like that. Sometimes we do things wrong, but somebody else sees and they warn us or remind us or help us, give us some constructive feedback. And that's an important part, isn't it? It's just like when you're making a statue, you keep looking at it. Even the statue we're making in Thailand, they would send us photos so we could see what was going on. Different people had a look, then send some feedback back. In the same way, our own practice, sometimes we get stuck somewhere or lost somewhere or don't see something. Maybe someone else sees it that we don't. That's the value particularly of a teacher. Maybe your teacher sees where you've gone wrong or made a mistake and reminds you or explains to you something that you haven't seen yet, simply because they're looking from the outside. So there's that part of our practice relying on teachings and advice from Kalyana Mitta, those who have practiced before us and who wish us well, and not just criticizing us out of jealousy or aversion, but they wish us to know and see the Dhamma, so they give us some extra knowledge or understanding, maybe open up something that we didn't see, we missed ourselves, something in our behavior. Sometimes it's our speech, our actions are not in line with Dhamma. Sometimes it's our view, we're holding on to a wrong view, or even holding on to a right view, but holding on too tightly so it becomes wrong, cause of suffering. So the advice we receive, the teachings we receive when given with goodwill and wisdom can be invaluable in our practice along the way. But ultimately, like the artist, the artist has to get to the point where they're trusting in their own judgment, especially the more refined work. Maybe nobody else sees the mistake, only the artist sees their mistake or what needs to be adjusted as the more refined work comes along. In the same way, as we practice, in the end, the teacher's words and the help we get from the outside maybe takes us a back role, a secondary role. It never disappears, but in the end we have to be the one watching our own mind, which is something Ajahn Chah emphasized over and over again. We have to learn to be our own witness to our own state of mind, to see, particularly to see what is wholesome and skillful to be developed and that's conducive to the arising of samadhi and wisdom, states of peace, understanding, and then the unskillful states of mind which are obstructive, hindrances, which are to be abandoned. The details of that, we are the ones who have to undergo and apply the Dhamma through our practice of mindfulness, wisdom, or sila, samadhi, panya. We have to do that. And it's not the teacher's job so much, it's our job to get in there and look and observe the day-to-day details of our mind and what's going on. And train ourselves to know the difference between wholesome Dhammas and unwholesome Dhammas, and then act accordingly. As we just chanted in the Awada Patimokkha, cultivate the wholesome and abandon the unwholesome. So Ajahn Chah would talk about it as a process of awakening to the truth, waking up from the slumber of our moods and our dreams and our attachment to our different mental states, pleasure and displeasure, happiness and suffering, waking the mind up by developing mindfulness. So mindfulness directed firstly on the outside to our speech, our actions, to wake up to how we are interacting with the world, how we relate to other people, how we relate to the material world, how much we use stuff, how we spend our money, how we earn our money, how we speak to other people, how we listen to other people, how we act, use this body to act and do things in the world. That's a process of awakening, bringing mindfulness to bear on our speech and our actions, what we call sila, virtue. And with the aim is simply to be able to live quite normally and with a mind that is free from regret, free from remorse. So the Buddha gave us guidelines, 5 precepts, 8 precepts, which are not commandments from the Buddha, we must do this, must do that. They're simply guidelines to help us see where our mind gets caught into unwholesome ways of body and speech, or unwholesome intentions that come out in our body and speech. And you'll notice when your behavior lies within the 5 precepts, you tend to be at ease. There's no regret or feelings of guilt, suspicion, worry, fear. You feel happy. Not bothering anyone, causing any suffering to others, not causing suffering to yourself. You're going about your business, but in a way that is calm, harmless. And the benefit is the mind becomes more peaceful. It's a kind of happiness, the happiness of non-remorse or non-regret. But something Ajahn Chah also reminded us over and over again is that can, in itself, can be addictive, or a kind of subtle attachment. And often we want a rest in our practice, don't we? We've put forth effort to learn how to practice to a certain level, to learn Dhamma, practice precepts, become more mindful. We make adjustments in our life, all of which is very good. We improve things in our life maybe through the practice. And we wouldn't do it if we weren't improving things. You wouldn't do it. No one forces you to practice the Buddhist teachings. But at the same time, there's also part of the mind that wants to just say, oh, that's good enough, and step back and have a rest. And maybe like the artist who's done the figure, the statue to a certain point, which is good enough, and maybe some people might even say, oh, it's good enough, no need to work on it anymore. But of course we shouldn't do that, or we should be wary of doing that, because there's always still some subtle clinging attachment to defilement in the mind that maybe is still there and needs to be addressed. So we have to watch out for that tendency towards complacency or satisfaction in the good that we have achieved, even though there's still more good, more practice to be done, because it's an obstacle in the end. We have to learn how to investigate further, develop this quality Dhamma Vichaya, investigation of the Dhamma, researching, learning from our experience, and questioning, and continuing to summon up more effort into the practice. And this continues with the practice of meditation, because as your mindfulness refines and becomes more continuous and steady, and you put effort into your sila, then the practice of meditation becomes easier and more obvious how to do it, because sila really brings you to the point where you can train your mind to focus on meditation objects, whether it's developing just a simple object such as the breath, one-pointedness on the breath, one-pointedness on the Buddha, Buddhanusati, or meditation in the form of developing wisdom or insight, vipassana. This requires effort, but the sila supports that effort, because if you're not too stirred up from your day through your actions, your speech, you're feeling at ease with no regret, then to turn the mind inwards, to be mindful of the breath, or mindful of focusing on the impermanent nature of physical sensations, the body, mental states. Well, it's quite doable. Sila brings you to that point. But then we can practice for a while with our meditation and achieve some even deeper states of peace and calm, experience samadhi, especially when there are times when the hindrances drop away and the mind merges with its object, and we're just mindful of the breath, say. And your mind is just quietly observing the breath. The mindfulness is continuous. We have time available, so we really get into it and enjoy it. You may have some rapture arise and happiness, contentment to do it. But then instead of going on to develop more wisdom and insight and investigating the Dhamma further, this little kilesa or defilement of complacency can slip in again, and there's the satisfaction with it's good enough. The feeling of peace that you've achieved, both physically and mentally, can be quite satisfying to the point where you don't want to go further in the practice. So it actually contributes to a state of dullness. You might call it happy dullness, but it's dullness nonetheless, where your mind is saying it's good enough, so you've put forth effort in sila, you've developed some samadhi, your mind is not too worried by things, not too concerned by things, experiencing some peace, and that's it. It just sticks with that, with the sense that it's good enough. It can lead on to just drowsiness and sleepiness as well. Dullness is very close to drowsiness. But it doesn't have to be. One can still be awake, but enjoying the pleasure of the samadhi to the point where one is not putting forth effort to investigate the Dhamma any further, to develop more insight or wisdom. So again, it's like the artist stepping back. The Buddha statue so far is good enough. Can't see any real blemishes. It's always, it's as near as perfect as good enough. And the average person comes along and says, "This is good enough. This is a good statue. I like this." But it's not. The mind of dullness is clearly not the mind of wisdom or clarity, truly seeing the way things are. It's not the mind of Dhamma. It's near to the mind of Dhamma, but it's not Dhamma. So Ajahn Chah said again, you've got to wake yourself up, arouse more effort, more energy, put it back into the practice, and particularly to contemplate or reflect on experience. The sila, the samadhi, is the firm base, and it's giving your mind that stillness where you're just dropping the normal activities, the thoughts you're concerned with about people and work and your health and money and all kinds of things. But you also have to go on and investigate further, because greed, anger, delusion, kilesa, attachment to the idea of self, attachment to different views and opinions, which are the basis for suffering, is still there. So Dhamma Vicaya, we have to investigate the Dhamma further, not to be complacent. And one aspect of Ajahn Chah's way of training, it's very hard to pin down techniques, but one recurring theme in his training was to wake people up by pointing out the impermanent nature of conditions and to provide situations that help with that. So he was quite unpredictable in different situations. He could help people, check with people, particularly monks living with him. He would check to see if they were becoming complacent, meaning they've attained their sila, they know how to be a monk and practice. They may know how to meditate and attain some calm on a regular basis even. But he would check further to see whether there was still this attachment to self, the deeper attachment to the five khandhas, body and mind as self, seen as self, viewed as self. Simply by changing things around, changing the routines is a good one he might do, where you've been having many days of morning, evening meetings of meditation, perhaps quite intense practice, practicing late into the night, and then stop the meetings, see what it brings up. And he'd say, some people enjoy it when the formal meditation meetings are stopped, then they go away and they practice on their own, and they enjoy the freedom to decide how many hours to walk meditation, sit meditation, how to spend their time. But other people just go and sleep. Or the opposite, he might have a period of meditation and then say, now we have to do a work project, which occasionally comes up in a monastery, because monasteries are places that funded entirely by charity, and out of compassion, Ajahn Chah was very aware, very sensitive to the burden on the lay community. So sometimes there was a need, say, like to build a wall around the monastery. So they say, now we're going to build the wall around the monastery every day. Put bricks up, transport bricks, sand, gravel, cement, do the work to save the labour costs for the lay community, so we can have a wall to protect the forest. So those who don't like making brick walls, they get a chance to consider their own attachment to the view, we shouldn't be making a brick wall or building. Some monks would like it. They can see their attachment to the liking of building work. Maybe they find meditation hard, so the building is more enjoyable. Some don't like it, they'd rather be elsewhere. But the idea is the sudden change brings up a reflection, doesn't it? What does it bring up in your mind? Desire, enjoyment, or aversion? So sometimes he's famous for switching things around, stopping things, starting things, changing the routine in the monastery. Sometimes it would be the uncertainty about where you would spend the rains. So monks would be hoping to spend their 3-month annual rains retreat with Ajahn Chah, to be with him, hear his teachings, be in his presence. That was generally popular with monks. But then he had quite a number of branch monasteries which needed monks as well. So sometimes at the beginning of the rainy season or just before, he would choose monks to go out to stay in branch monasteries. And it's a little bit like a kind of a lottery process, so you didn't know whether you're going out or you're staying. The uncertainty that brought up could bring up kilesa. The monk keeps the precepts, knows how to meditate, develops samadhi, but still, am I staying, am I going? And it's not within the monk's choice. Because in those days, Ajahn Chah was given that authority and the trust in the teacher, the respect for the teacher, then it's up to the teacher. Sometimes with a few hours' notice, a monk was sent hundreds of kilometres to spend the Vasa, the rains retreat, in a monastery he'd never been to before, or didn't know very well, didn't know the monks there, didn't know what to expect, and out of faith in Ajahn Chah, they'd just have to go. You go here, you go there. Sometimes he'd take them, sometimes they'd just go. And partly it's a chance to see, what does it bring up in your mind? This sudden change. In the end, it's nothing personal. That's the whole thing with the training, is that you have to see it's nothing personal. It's not like the world's conspiracy against you, to get what you want or not get what you want. It's just the way things are, and it's a way to test to see whether there's some attachment. Maybe you're attached to the comfort of the kuti you're living in. It's another one. The hut in the monastery you like, and then there's a change around, and monks swap kutis, swap their dwelling places, and you're in a new dwelling place. Or you just put in a place that you didn't plan, and you probably would have chosen another hut in the monastery. In Ajahn Chah's monastery there's about 70 huts, and in the old days they were pretty simple wooden structures. Some of them were full of termites, some of them had geckos, different creatures living in them, some were old and a bit damp. So very easy to get attached to a view that a dwelling place was a good one or a bad one. You like it, you don't. It's another way to test your vipassana in practice. This is wisdom training. You've got your sila, you've developed your samadhi, but do you still have attachment to your self-view? Do you like the kuti or not? And the only answer is, well, whatever the answer is, you just let it go, don't you? You see it as impermanent, as not self. In a monastery with 70 monks, you don't have a lot of choice. Not everyone will get everything they want because there's so many monks. So it's not a personal conspiracy against each monk to get them. It's more just, this is the way things are, but how is your meditation with this? Does it bring up pleasure, displeasure? That's where the conditions help you to develop wisdom, and you have to use Dhamma Vichaya, investigation of the Dhamma, to understand more deeply your reactions. If you're still with the dullness of samadhi, the pleasure of samadhi, well then perhaps wisdom doesn't catch up in time. So some monks who already had with good meditation may find still some suffering arising, being put in a hut that they didn't like, or sent to a monastery they didn't like, or didn't want, didn't choose. But in the big picture, in the long run, that can be quite useful for us. Not getting what we want can be useful when it's seen in terms of part of the practice. It's something to reflect on, not getting what you want, or getting what you don't want. If you just get what you want all the time, that is the definition of being spoiled, isn't it? And when you're spoiled, you don't learn. So the mind of samadhi is a kind of a mind that wants to be spoiled. Get what you want, get the right conditions for our samadhi. So Ajahn Chah would talk about this. The monk who likes the right conditions, the perfect conditions, so he can maintain the peace and pleasure of samadhi, but is not yet developing deep wisdom. So sometimes the conditions change and this is exposed. It's not always that they wanted to stay with Ajahn Chah. Some monks didn't like the big monastery with many monks. They had faith in Ajahn Chah, but they preferred a very quiet monastery with just a few monks, because then they could get into their meditation more, maybe more time, more free time, less distractions. So sometimes those monks would be asked to come back to Ajahn Chah. And Ajahn Chah's monastery in the rainy season, the 3-month rains retreat, is very damp. Many monks found it quite challenging in the damp jungle. Even to this day, that's true. And they might be happily developing their samadhi out in the branch monastery, and Ajahn Chah might say, oh, that monk is just enjoying his samadhi out there. Let's bring him back and see how he practices here. So they come back to the monastery, he gets a chance to be close to Ajahn Chah, which is good, but then there's different conditions. There's maybe some work projects, or there's chanting, morning and evening chanting, or there's just many monks, whereas before they had few monks. The food is different. If you're attached to the food in one place, you go to another and the food is totally different, what does that bring up? Food can bring up extreme emotions, can't it? If you're used to one kind of food and you go somewhere else, the food is not to your liking, how does that affect your mind? And Ajahn Chah understood all this because he'd been through it all himself. And that's one of the reasons people respected and valued his teachings, is because he taught from experience, not just from the textbooks. He'd been through the ups and downs, the highs and lows of the practice. He'd suffered on the path and he'd gone beyond it. He'd transcended suffering, seeing through samuti dhamma or samuti satya, the conventional reality that we cling to normally, the unenlightened, unawakened mind. When we're asleep with our thoughts, we're always clinging to conventional reality. There's me and what I like and what I want, and there's my place, dwelling place, and my food, and there's my body, and there's my views and opinions on everything under the sun. That's all conventional reality. Then there's Paramatta Satya, ultimate reality, which when seen leads to vimutti, liberation. And Ajahn Chah loved to talk about this. You have to see the impermanent and selfless nature of the conventional reality in order to experience liberation. This is exactly where you see it. The opinion about something as simple or as basic as food, what I like, what I don't like. You move from one place where you've got things the way you like, the food you want, and then you go to a new place where you're getting a whole different set of food every day. Sometimes it's too much, too little, not to your liking. What does it bring up? But then to reflect, this is all just views and opinions and conventional reality, the names, the tastes, the importance, the value we give to these things that we attach to. That's not ultimate reality, that's conventional reality that tricks us because we're asleep, we're not awake to it. So you have to, you might say, up your game, try harder, sharpen the mindfulness, bring in the wisdom, the contemplation of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, anicca, dukkha, anatta. Because it's vipassana that takes the suffering out of the experience. Because even samadhi can be a basis for suffering when we cling to it. If it's dependent on conditions, having lots of nice time with silent surroundings and nobody bothering you, everything to your liking, well, you may attain some samadhi, and it's good on one level, but it's not yet really good because it's fragile. And then you go somewhere else and it's that fragility is exposed. So the food changes and maybe aversion. Oh, I don't like this, I don't want this. This is where mindfulness and wisdom have to investigate more deeply. Maybe the attachment to food, the desire for food, tastes, comfort in different ways. Contemplate to break through the conventional reality, the conventional appearance of self, the normal way human beings are. We all have our likes and dislikes, our preferences, and we have our thoughts and views and opinions about all this, and you go about your business course and you tend to just follow desire all the time as long as you can. But when that's suddenly frustrated by a change of conditions, what does it bring up? Does it bring up suffering, or does your mindfulness know this is a change of conditions that's impermanent, not self, and then accepts the change of conditions without suffering and knows it without suffering? Or does it bring up suffering? Not getting what you want, being with what you don't want. The new kuti. I've been put in a kuti at Ajahn Chah's monastery, and first day in and you look up and there's 4 geckos on the ceiling and they're all competing to poo in the centre of that little hut that's only 2 meters by 3 meters. And you have to take a gamble on where you're going to put your sleeping mat without getting pooed on. You sort of think, oh, this looks nice, this nice little hut in the forest, I'll have some good meditation here. Then you look up and it's like your mood just drops straight away. Oh, I'm going to have to live with these 4 guys. It can be as simple as that. Or you're living or sitting next to a monk that you didn't know before, and you might get on well with him, or you might not get on well with him. You don't control it, it's beyond your control. So our reactions to things teach us the Dhamma. They teach us where we're holding on to the conventional reality of a self, a person with my views, my opinions, my preferences. And then you see the suffering of that, and so you're looking with mindfulness and wisdom through it. One way of describing vipassana is looking through things, transcending things, or parting the delusion of conventional reality to see the truth. Actually there's nothing there anyway. It's empty of attachment, empty of self. Because when the mind sees the emptiness, it's peaceful, even if conditions are not ideal. And Ajahn Chah embodied the mind that had gone beyond conventions, the mind that was in or focused on Nibbana. He seemed to embody that in his presence, his way, his teachings, his words, his example, even when he was ill. And there was a great sense of just non-suffering or emptiness around him. Even when he was physically suffering, nobody had the feeling that mentally he was suffering with the physical suffering of the body. Everyone felt it was a great sacrifice that he was alive but sick for many years, still providing a focal point for the Sangha. But he would say the mind that sees through conventional reality sees it for what it is, as conventional reality, knows the limitations of it, and that mind can transcend it and experience the higher reality of liberation. So even for lay people, the Ajahn Chah in the end would get them to come back and investigate the attachment to the body. So they've attained some samadhi, some peace, some happiness, good. But then you turn to come back and contemplate this physical body and how we attach and identify with it as self. Over and over again he would say, go contemplate the 32 parts of the body, Kesa, Loma, Nakadanta, Tacho. These Pali words that are recited at a Buddhist monk's ordination. They're a meditation. They're for training in Dhamma Vicaya, investigation of the truth. By focusing on analysing the body and breaking it down into its component parts. Yes, hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, the organs, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, the stomach, the blood, the urine, all the different body parts, to contemplate them and see them as an impermanent not self, or go further and contemplate them as 4 elements. Earth element is the solid part, say the bones, earth element. Water element, say the blood, the urine, the phlegm. The air element, the breath. The fire element, the heat in the body. The temperature of the body, which goes up and down. When we die, the temperature goes cold, isn't it? When we got a fever, it goes hot. When you got COVID or something similar, you get the heat of the fever. When you exercise, you heat up. When you eat food, it heats up. Contemplating earth, air, fire and water in the body as not self breaks through the conventional reality of self. Ajahn Chah said, do this all the time. Do it to the point where you can see your friends as a collection of body parts, 4 elements, maybe as a collection of bones, skeletal bones. There's no one approach here. He was just giving examples, but he encouraged monks to practice this, and lay people, practice this to the point where you're much more familiar with the unattractive and impermanent nature of the physical body. Then you don't get caught out by conventional reality of attraction, aversion, this person, who they are, how much they're worth, who they know, how popular they are, how unpopular they are, how good they are, how bad they are. All the ideas that conventional reality throws up and that we cling to and see as so real and meaningful and cause us so much suffering. When you contemplate the body as a body, seeing it in its true nature as 4 elements, well, it brings all of that back down to the true reality, and they're just ideas. I mean, we still use conventional reality, of course. We're living in the world. We have to live in the world and relate to the world. But in terms of suffering, if we just cling to conventions without reflecting on them, we suffer. Because they're never going to be satisfying. We never get what we want. No one's as popular as they would like, as rich as they would like, as healthy as they would like. Nobody gets the things that they want, always. We always have to experience some loss, some gain, some loss, some dissatisfaction. People like us, they don't like us, they praise us, then they blame us. The conventional world is like that. It's very uncertain, uncontrollable. It's not self. But when you see it, see through it, the clear eye of vipassana, well, then the suffering starts to subside and abate and disappear the more we practice. So Ajahn Chah, teaching like this, gained great results for himself, practiced it for himself and also for others, and that's why he's remembered, why we do travel to his chedi and pay respects to the relics, listen to his teachings, reflect on them again and again, because they're coming from true human experience, but turning the suffering of human beings into something good, into wisdom and understanding. And making a Buddha statue is it's just a physical representation of the compassion, the peace, the wisdom of the Buddha. It's a skillful means, it's an aid for us. In the new monastery, in Bodhipala Monastery in Adelaide, it will be a skillful means, something that hopefully can inspire people to practice, reminds them of these qualities, in some small or bigger way can help people practice to break through some of their attachments and experience the same kind of peace that Ajahn Chah experienced. So for tonight I'll leave you with these reflections and wish you all good health, safety and peace of mind.